Hi, everybody. Thank you all for coming. And before I introduce our speaker, Rami Ismail, I will just give a quick overview of today's meetup. So first, we will have a presentation by Rami. And after that, we will have a Q&A session. So you can type your questions in YouTube chat, or you can join our Zoom meeting and you can ask questions live to Rami. And then after that, we will have playthrough of games made on Global Game Jam by our community. And for that, we will move to our internal Discord server, which I will also post link later. And yeah, without further ado, I will introduce Rami, who is an independent game developer and tools developer with a rich history of and track record of around 20 games made, most known for Ridiculous Fishing and Nuclear Throne. He's also co-founder of Vlambeer. And with his and besides that, he also made tools like .press, do press kit, do distribute, and do contract, which help game developers all over the world to publish games and to actually bring them to the public. And he also advocates for equality in the game developer industry through his work at the Game World Conference. And without further ado, I will give stage to Rami.
Hi, hello. Glad to be here. Let me see if I can get the camera working without silly stuff happening. No, silly stuff is definitely happening. Oh, it's a mirror. That's great. Hi. So I was asked to give a talk about what to do when you are making a video game and you've got your prototype and you're in a pretty good spot with it. Where do you go next? So today I want to talk about how the entire process of game development, including prototyping, works, and what your focus should be, what the process should be, and how you can get the most out of each of those steps on the way to making your video game. At the end, if I have some time left, I will talk about 6 shapes, 6 simple shapes that if you memorize them will allow you to design better games and more coherent designs. So let's just start at the start and get the presentation going. So how to make games and how I can help you make yours. Just to repeat some of the introduction, I am Rami Ismail. Can I ask if the screen is mirrored? Is that happening? Just real quick.
No, I think it's okay.
Okay, it looks mirrored on my end, just weird. So I'm Rami Ismail. I'm I was one half of Dutch independent studio Vlambeer. I am now an independent developer consultant and the executive director at gamedev.world. I am the creator of tools such as Do Press Kit. I'm involved in the creation of the Indie Mega Booth. I am a partner in Indie Fund and I collaborate with the IGDA. My main focus is ensuring that people around the world, no matter what country they live in, get equal access to the games industry, resources, and opportunity. That's a very short version of who I am. Before this, I was best known as one half of Dutch independent studio Vlambeer, where I helped create games such as Super Crate Box, Ridiculous Fishing, Luftrausers, and Nuclear Throne. So let's talk about creativity. Because creativity is always brought to us, the act of making games, the act of being creative. It's always explained to us as this big word without very much definition. And I would argue that creativity as a whole is not actually a useful concept. What I would argue is that creativity exists out of different subterms, and each of those subterms is useful. So those subterms will be ideation, brainstorming, prototyping, proof of concept, iteration, and feedback. And we're going to go over each of those steps in the next 45 minutes to an hour. So one more time, it's going to be ideation, brainstorm, prototyping, supporting materials, and then iteration. Whew. I have a bit of a cold. So let's start from the start. Let's start with ideation. I put a wrong word here. This is ideation. So as we go through the process of making games, I think my computer just crashed.
Yeah, something cut out.
Right. Am I back? Am I not back? What is happening?
Currently, we see like XSplit.
Okay. Yeah, I think something crashed. Let me try and recover.
Okay.
This is a good start. I'm glad you can hear me still.
Yeah, you can hear you still, yeah.
Okay. My computer is doing absolutely nothing though. So anyway, let me just try and continue until my computer recovers. As long as you can hear me, we shouldn't have to lose time. So the most important thing is that when you're going through each of the steps, there is a process of control. There is certain things that you can do to make sure that as you go, you're not losing time and you're making the best choices for your game that you can possibly make. For ideation, what is important is to realize that ideas are easy and ideas are cheap, and that it is impossible for us with our human brain to figure out whether an idea is good or not before we actually try and test it. That means that in the phase of ideation, in the phase of coming up with ideas, we should postpone judgment. We should not talk of why something wouldn't work. We should not talk about why something is a bad idea. We should not talk about anything that can slow down the process of coming up with more ideas, because really in the ideation phase, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for ideas. The important thing there is that you keep in mind that no matter what, ideas should not be shot down here yet. After ideation, we end up in brainstorm. And in brainstorming, the important part is that we expand on the ideas that we think are interesting by coming up with as many supporting ideas as possible. So in ideation, you might come up with the idea of a game about a dog chasing a car, right? And then in brainstorming, we're going to figure out what ideas support this, what thoughts support this. Are we going to think about the types of dogs, think about the types of car, think about the types of gameplay, the types of art? What can we do to ensure that that our brainstorm is positive and successful? Here too, it is important that we don't shoot down ideas. I actually have a really good slide here. Do you mind if I quickly reset my computer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, let me reset my computer. I'll be back in a second. Somebody play some like hold music or pause music or something. I'll be back.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Rami. And I guess we can try to screen share again. Oh, sorry. Give me a second. Yeah. Now you can do it.
Hi. Hello. This is going great. Let me see. Let me see if I can screen share again without causing any issues. And maybe I can go through some of the slides I was talking about earlier to show you what I was talking about, just to make sure that we don't lose too much time here, because the slide I want to show you is kind of helpful with that. Where were we? Right, we made it to brainstorming, right? Let's see. Does this work? My computer super crashed, by the way. It was great. I had to reboot the entire thing. Change the window to the slideshow. There we go. And now,
also,
yeah, I'll have to turn the camera on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, it works.
Yeah, we are back. Yeah.
Let's hope it doesn't break this time. Good. So we had talked about ideation, right? The control of process, and that in coming up with ideas, we need to be non-judgmental. We have to let ideas in. We have to let ideas grow. At the end of that step, it's important to not be too rough on the ideas you've had. You pick an idea here, right? You pick a game to chase, a thing to make. But you have to be able to let it go still. You have to be able to say, okay, you know what? This doesn't work out. Very early on, ideation looks like this, right? If you take the Luftrausers example in the middle, this one, then you notice that really all that's there is press up to boost, let go to stall, left and right to steer, X to fire, let go to repair. In here, we're keeping to a number of rules that as a studio, as Vlambeer, we used to have, where the rule was that if there's a reason to press a button, there needs to be a reason to let go of a button. And that if we could minimize the amount of buttons that people would have to use, that would be cleaner game design. You also see it here on the right with the ridiculous fishing store. We argued about this store for months until somebody just drew this in MS Paint, and we ended up using that. These are not final, even though we jokingly say final boss design version 1 here. The version 1 kind of gives away that this is not meant to be the final version. What is important is to realize that none of these ideas were good or even loved or even the ones that we immediately looked at and went like, oh yeah, this is great. These were all just that, just ideas. So during the brainstorm, you have to have, again, a process. And the process in a brainstorm should be to set a goal and then not go with it as soon as you hit it. So with a brainstorm, you might say, okay, we have a dog chasing a car, right? The example I had before. So what happens when the dog catches the car? And you might say, well, the dog bites the car. And that completes the goal, right? You were trying to figure out what happens when the dog catches the car. Well, the dog bites it. But if you stop there with brainstorming, you're not doing a good job of brainstorming. What if the dog jumps on the car? What if the dog then gets to throw the car by biting it and it's a super strong dog, right? What happens if the dog can surf on the car like in Just Cause? Or what happens when the dog can turn into the car and now start racing? Who knows, right? Like all of these ideas are ridiculous, but the fact that there are so many different directions of gameplay that have opened up just by not going with, well, the dog bites the car. That's the important part of a brainstorm. One of the best tips I've ever learned is the 6 thinking hats, which is a decision-making tool by a philosopher named Edward de Bono. And the argument is basically that if you are working in a creative environment and you have to make a decision, one of the best ways of doing it is to give everybody in the room a hat. And we don't mean a real hat. We mean a metaphorical hat. So one person is going to wear the white hat. And the white hat, all that person does is name facts. They do not get to have emotions. They do not have to be creative. They do not get to be positive. They do not get to be negative. All they do is they bring facts. They might say something like, well, a dog cannot throw a car, right? But that's it. Nothing else, just facts. The red hat is gut feelings. They might say something like, "Oh, if the dog could throw the car, that'd be so cool. I think people will love it." Right? They don't have to support what they feel with arguments. They just get to feel. They get to feel about the idea. They get to feel about what they think the audience will say or think. They get to just go by gut feeling. They do not have to justify what they say. The blue hat is the most important one. This is the person in control. And as we said, the main part of making a good game is control. So the blue person, the blue hat, is in charge of making sure that the brainstorm continues. So they keep track of the goal. They keep track of whether there's been enough exploration of the goal. And eventually they will commit to moving on to the next point of the brainstorm or the next subject of the brainstorm, or even shut down the brainstorm at all. They keep track of making sure everybody speaks about equally, that nobody keeps talking and doesn't shut up. And ultimately, they're in charge of making sure that the brainstorm is a success. The green hat is the creative hat. This is the person that can come up with ideas, that can be creative, that can change the tone, the subject. They can change the dog into a cat. They can change the car into a surfboard. They bring their creative energy to the process. And they have the yellow hat, which is positive. And really all they can do is find a positive thing in any idea. So if we have the example of the cat, the dog can throw the car, right? They bite it and they just like shake it out into space. They have to find a creative there. They have to say like, well, it will make it really funny when you catch the car, right? Like there's a payoff there that could be worth it. But they cannot be negative. They have to be positive. And finally, you've got the negative hat. And the negative hat is there just to be negative about ideas. They would say things like, we don't have time to do that. We don't have the expertise to do that. I think based on our audience that this idea would not be appreciated. Keep in mind, this is not the red hat. They don't just get to have feelings. They have to support their feelings with arguments. For a brainstorm, I suggest you leave the black hat outside of the room. Nobody wears the black hat. Everybody else gets one of the other hats. And one person, your producer or your creative director, wears the blue hat. Everybody else takes one of the hats. Maybe multiple people wear the same hat. And after a set period of time, the person with the blue hat will shift the hat the other people wear. So the person with the white hat becomes the red hat becomes the green hat becomes the yellow hat. All of this might sound absolutely ridiculous. When my teacher told me this back when I was in the university, I thought it was the silliest thing I had ever heard. And I probably laughed about it for a very long time. Now that I've run a game studio for 10 years and I work in the industry for a long time, I've realized that creating processes of communication and creating processes of creativity is probably one of the most important skills I've ever learned. So even if it sounds silly, give it a go, right? Try this. And then for brainstorming, leave the black hat outside of the room. At that point, you assess. And now at the end of the brainstorm, when you're done, you've explored the space. This is the first time we make a real assessment choice. This is the first time where we bring in the black hat. Not during ideation, not during brainstorm. At the end of brainstorm is where we bring our assessment. And we say, this is the best idea. This is the smartest idea. This is the idea that fits our resources best. At Vlambeer, frequently, this looked like this. Just a giant list of things we were doing with check marks for the things that we did, red outlines for the things we want to do, and very short notes. None of these things are very well written. And we went from the first step, from ideation, to this step in about 3 days. Jan-Willem Nijman, who was my co-founder at Vlambeer, and Paul Veer, who was a freelance artist that we worked with, and Kozilek, Yukio Kallio, a musician, and Lobster, who is the sound designer on Nuclear Throne. All of them worked together in just a few days to get from the start to here, right? Now, as they were doing this, they were prototyping. And prototyping is an incredibly important part of game development. And it is the part that is probably most misunderstood, because in the process of prototyping, we're not actually looking to make exactly what we want to make. We're looking to divide the game that we are making into the smallest testable units we can possibly come up with. So if you have a giant game, you want to return it to the smallest possible state. If you have a big strategy game, you want to return it to, how do I move a character, right? How do two characters interact? How do I move around the map? What small verbs, what small activities can we test in a prototype, right? And one thing that is critical to this, that a lot of teams misunderstand, that it is important to know your strengths. It's important to know what you're good at. If you have a team with incredible artists, then please, for the love of God, prototype in art. Prototype with fake screenshots. Prototype with drawings. Prototype with good art implemented. Prototype to your strengths. If you have sound designers, work that sound design in. If you have game designers, make prototypes. If you have great programmers, build advanced prototypes. But prototype to your strengths. When I say prototype to your strengths, I also mean know your weaknesses. I am a terrible drawer. This is the best cow I have ever drawn in my life. I forgot that cows' heads are not above their body. They're like in front of it. And I added the spots very late. I cannot draw a cow. I just cannot. So when I have to draw a cow, I write the word cow next to it because I can write. I'm good at writing, generally. And at the same time, know your tools, right? If you're making a game and you want to make a 3D game and you are a game maker user like we were, then maybe your prototyping tools might not be able to fully capture the notion of that design, right? If you are somebody who works really fast in 3D art and you're going to make a 2D game, you might run into problem shifting. This is a mistake that happens on every level of the games industry. This is a mistake that happens in AAA. People try to break away from their tool set, from what they know. They try to challenge themselves. And that's cool. That's good. But it's also important to know when you've been defeated and you are wasting time paddling water for trying to do something that isn't even necessary for the game. At the end of prototyping, you evaluate. This is the part where assessment becomes critically important. This is the part where you go and you look at a prototype and you look at the goals you've set and you say, this is good, and we will continue iterating on it. Or you say, this is bad, and we will find why it is bad and iterate new solutions that have nothing to do with this. This is the core of game development. And as you are developing a game, you will spend many, many hours and many, many days and many, many months in this tiny cycle of how do we fix this problem, or how do we achieve this goal? How can we test it? And when we test it, how do we judge it? One of the biggest problems with game development is that there are no hard rules, no objective measurement for whether something is good. It is just up to you, which means you have to make that choice. At this point, when we have enough prototypes, when we have a prototype of the art style in the form of thumbnails or silhouettes or an artboard or a mood board, when we have a prototype of the sound design in terms of basic sounds or downloaded sounds or maybe even already recorded sounds, we have a good idea of the music, a prototype of what the game will sound like sonically in terms of audio. When we have a good idea of the design and the code structure, when we have all that, it is time for two things. The first one is time for a full prototype, a prototype of everything together. Does it work? Do the mechanics interact the way you work? Does the interface work the way you work? Do people that understand what they have to do understand what they have to do? Do people who do not understand what they have to do learn it quickly enough? The second thing is your supporting materials. And these are your vertical slice and your pitch. If you're going to talk to publishers, these are the two things you will need more than anything. You will need a pitch and you will need a vertical slice. In the process, this is one of prioritization, of triage, of figuring out what is important to your game and what is not. And very often people misunderstand what is important about their game. They say, oh, my game has 12 levels, but who cares? Who cares about your 12 levels? Are the levels good? Are they interesting? Are they fun? If so, why are they fun? One of the best tips I've ever learned to answer this question well is to, whenever you think of a question, imagine the person asking you adding, and why does that matter? And why does that matter? If you remember, and why does that matter, and you answer that question instead of the question you were trying to answer, you will do a better job of communicating your game. You'll do a better job of talking about your game. You'll do a better job of pitching your game. And then you have to find the perfect slice. The perfect slice, very simply, is a segment of your game polished to an aspirational goal, to how you want the game to look to the best of your ability at that point in the process, how you want the game to sound, how you want the game to feel. A tiny segment polished up to those standards. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing has to be perfect. Nothing will ever be perfect. But what is important is that when you show somebody this, they see your dream. They understand what you are going for. And you don't have to explain in words anymore something like a game design, which cannot be communicated in words, no matter how big the game design document is that you type, right? A game design document will always be the document that guides you to the actual game. And a vertical slice is an example of the ability of your team, but also a show, a proof of the fact that this game actually is as good as it sounds. For a platformer, a vertical slice might be a section of a level. For a racing game, it might be one track. For a shooting game, it might be one fight, or maybe two, maybe a room, maybe two. Every game has its own vertical slice, but in the vertical slice, you prove that the game is interesting, and you prove that your team can hit the bar they've set for yourself. It doesn't just give you confidence in that you can do what you need, but when you talk to a publisher, when you talk to a funder, when you talk to anybody who can support you in your game, it will help you convince them. So the vertical slice is critical. Picking the right vertical slice with the parts that really matter about your game is critical. And again, a vertical slice shows what is unique about your game. It's not about 12 levels. It's about, here is the unique thing in my game. That should always fit in a vertical slice. It will always fit in a vertical slice. You just have to find which one. At this part, the assessment is no longer your own. You don't assess anymore. At this point, who is assessing is the publishers, the audience, the people that will play your game. At this point, what you are doing is you are opening yourself up to criticism. You are opening yourself up to harsh, real feedback. And you are opening yourself up to failure. And this is probably one of the hardest parts of the entire process of game development, because as we make games, they turn into our babies. They turn into things we genuinely care about. And when we hear that our babies are not right, are not good for the market, are not a fit, it hurts. Of course it hurts. But what we should take from this is the feedback. If they say nothing, we fail to convince them. If they have feedback, their feedback is honest, even if we do disagree with it. If they tell us that we are not a fit for their portfolio, they might just not be the right publisher. But if everybody says that we're not a fit for their portfolio, then what is wrong with the game that makes it a bad fit for the industry at the moment? So as you go, you always self-assess. But when we come here, somebody else does. And it is scary, but you have to do it. You have to go through it. And if everything's all right in the process of getting here, you've already been playtesting with people. You've already been playtesting with strangers. You already know where the weaknesses of your game are. You've already fixed the biggest problems, and you've come to terms with some of the others. Not all games will be perfect. Not all games will be flawless. In fact, no game will be perfect. No game will be flawless. And then we iterate. We iterate, and we iterate as if everything depends on it, because it does. We fix our mistakes. And as we fix our mistakes, we make new mistakes. And those new mistakes, we fix. We try and fix everything as efficiently as possible. At this point, you can't restart the game anymore. You can choose between continuing or dropping the game. And sometimes the one will be the better answer. Sometimes the other. The process control here is very simple. We do the opposite of what we did with brainstorming. With brainstorming, when we had an idea, we explored other ideas. With iteration, we go as fast as we can. Have an idea, test it. Have another idea, test it. Test every idea as fast as you can, as cheap as you can. Don't think about writing good code. Don't think about making good art. Don't think about any of these things. You have a goal. The goal is to fix a problem. Whether it's a problem in the design, whether it's a problem in your pitch, a problem in your marketing, you now have a context. You have a goal, you have a product, it's in development. You set the goal, you test immediately. So as fast as you can, as cheap as you can. And if it works, you keep building on it. And if it doesn't work, or you see new problems, you figure out how to fix those, or you drop the solution altogether. Every attempt that you make will make your game better. Not because it is necessarily a fix for the problems the game has, but because if it is not a fix, it shows you what solutions don't work, which leaves the space for your solution smaller and thus makes your solution easier to find. In assessment here, it's very simple. Does this solution fix the problem? And does this solution introduce more problems? If it introduces more problems than it solves, it might not be the best solution. But sometimes, even though it introduces more problems than it solves, the new problems are small. And then it might be the right solution. Decision making here comes down to triage, again, to priority, to making sure that your team can make a choice. And very often when I talk to developers, they don't have a system in place for triage. They don't have a system in place where they agree about what to do about a problem. And I think it's important to have that. I think it's important to know who makes choices, who is in charge of a certain problem, who gets to make decisions about a certain problem. I think for the most important thing here is that this discussion happens early. And the example I always give every developer is, imagine you release your game and it is out there and people love it. Millions of people are downloading. But your team finds two problems. They're watching the live streams and they find one. The first problem is every one of the players has an annoying problem. It's annoying. It's not game breaking, but it's annoying. It makes some part of the game really unpleasant to play. And people are talking about it. And the other problem is that your programmer finds a line in the code that they say should probably never get executed. Your program will never reach that code and it will never do what the code says. But what the code does, in case it is found, is it will format the hard drive of the player. You ask your programmer, what are the chances that this happens? And they say, well, 1 in 5 million. Now, what do? Do you fix the bug? You only have time for one fix. Do you fix the bug that is affecting everybody? and remove that annoyance? Or do you fix the bug that will probably never happen to anybody, but it will format somebody's hard drive? You have to choose one. These are not simple choices. And I can't tell anybody what the right choice is here. Personally, I believe that we should fix the format bug. But if you say no, we should fix the bug that everybody has, and then we'll fix the format bug in the future because the chances are so small, I can't tell you you're wrong. That's a risk you take. But making clear up front what the priorities are, who is in charge of certain decisions, what process you will follow in figuring out prioritization means that you won't spend all the time that you have to fix one of these bugs arguing about which bug to fix, and then no bug gets fixed. At this point in the game's development, you have seen the game go from an early prototype to something that is almost complete. Here you have Wasteland Kings, which turned into Nuclear Throne. And you can tell that early on in Wasteland Kings, we thought of it as a desert, an abandoned desert with broken cities in the background and kind of hopeless, right? In the final version, you have this campfire with the mutants being helpful and hopeful. They're sitting around, they're listening to songs, they're taking care of themselves. They're telling stories to each other, legends, myths. For us, the understanding from here to there was actually based on a song. When our musician came to us and said, well, this song will be the theme song of Nuclear Throne, we listened to it. And in our minds, we saw this scene. And we made it. And it changed the game forever. In Luftrausers, really early on, we realized that the thing that really made Luftrauser special, the first prototype of it, was when you would fly close over the water, just over the water. And the water would splash up, and it just looked so cool. It felt so cool. We wanted everybody to feel like they could skim over the water, just centimeters above it, and then flip around, do a stunt, and take out some enemies. And if you look in the final version of Luftrausers, you see how much we emphasize the water. You see the explosions. You see the reflection. You see when the airplane flies right over it, the trail. Most importantly, you see that the water, that sense of danger, has become the game. It has become the goal. And in Radical Fishing, you can see how this early version of the shop, this version that was purely UI, changed into a space that feels a bit more like it is real. It is now a wooden cabinet that you can scroll through, where you can choose your options, that feels like somebody is selling it to you. Right? In that regard, each of these games went through layers and layers of iteration, trying to figure out what mattered, what was special about these games, what made them what they are. And we didn't start with this, right? We didn't start here. No. When we started with the game that would ultimately become this, at the start of everything, it looked like that. That was it. There was no more than that. And the game that turned into Nuclear Throne, it looked like this and that. And the game that turned into Ridiculous Fishing and into the store, it started here. Things don't have to be perfect early on. You have time to go through your process. Finally, there's the question of feedback. How do you handle feedback? Feedback will happen through the entire process from start to finish at any given time. People in your team might give you people outside of your team might give you feedback. The trick of feedback is not to listen to it. The trick of feedback is to understand it. And these are two separate things. Because people will say, this boss fight is too hard. But what they might mean is, my weapons are not powerful enough. I did not have a health kit. I could not figure out how the boss works or how to damage it. They might be talking about a million different causes for the same piece of feedback. So you can't just go and say, okay, the boss is too hard, we'll lower their health. Because that might not solve the problem, and it might introduce other problems. So when it comes to feedback, the process should be collect the feedback, find the actual cause of the problem mentioned. Remember, I'm sure you've been taught this. Never trust the audience with solutions. Trust the audience with problems. If they tell you something is a problem, it is. Whether you can fix it, whether you should fix it, and how you fix it, now that is up to you again. That is up to triage. It's up to prioritization. And you should continuously be self-assessing, always be capturing as much feedback as you can. As early on in your project, as those early sketches that I showed you, we are testing. Good developers test from the very start of their game. They start in their own studio, and if they can't find more people in their studio with external teams or external developers that they trust, and when they can't find those anymore in public, you assess, you find the feedback, you figure out what it means, and you iterate on it. And you keep continuing that cycle. You keep making decisions, and ultimately, you'll end up with a game. Now, there's a lot that we can talk about that I haven't touched on, right? We haven't talked about how to exactly pitch your game, but I have given you the tools of how to pitch your game. Because when you think about it, that vertical slice is communication. And now the other part to think of is when you pitch, it's very simple. What does a publisher need to hear? What they want to hear from you is that when they invest in you, they get what they deserve. They get what they pay for. They get what you promise them. And from those questions, you can follow this exact process from start to finish, from ideation to feedback, and make a good pitch. The only tip I can give you for pitching that has always worked is that you need to stop thinking of this as a hobby that somebody is paying you for. You have to start thinking of it as a company that is taking a risk developing a game, which means that everybody on the project, including yourself, should get a full salary. It means that you should not make your budget lower just because you're worried that they will not pay you for it. I can tell you, as a scout, as somebody who helps publishers find games, that I have never heard of any publisher look at a game and go, that's too expensive. We will not even consider this game. They will try to negotiate, or they might tell you that it's outside of budget, but they will still be interested. They will still think of you as a worthy person to collaborate with. But if you go too low, if they simply calculate the amount of people on your team and they multiply it by the amount of months you need to work, and they have that value and they compare it to the value that you're asking for. If you need $50,000 to make a game and you promise that you will make it in $10,000, they will think of you as a fraud, as a cheat, or as an amateur. So when you come up with your timelines and when you come up with your budget, both things that should be in your pitch, you need to be honest. You need to be honest with them by being honest with yourself. The worst Kickstarter you will ever see is the developer who knows they need $20,000, but they fear they won't reach that goal. So they set the goal at $15,000. And you know what? When they reach $15,000, but they don't reach $20,000, now they have to make the game. But they don't have the budget. They don't have the budget that they knew they needed because they tried to be nice, because they tried to lower the costs. Do not do that. Do not decide for a publisher whether you're a good fit. Pitch. Pitch to all of them. Pitch to anybody that releases games on the platform that you're looking for. And learn from the feedback, right? But you might think, well, this publisher doesn't care about games like mine. Pitch anyway. Reach out to them, send them an email, ask to pitch your game. And if they say, well, this is not our type of game, they're fair. But maybe they're looking exactly for the type of game you're making. Maybe they want a different portfolio. Maybe they're looking for new opportunities in the market. Maybe they just want to support something different. Don't make that choice for them. Let them make that choice for you, even though it is scary. Let them choose. Bonus slides. We made it. I have 9 minutes left before the hour is over. Okay, let's go. This is going to go fast. So these are 6 shapes that I think will help you making video games. The first one is the human-computer interaction model, which is this green one up here in the top left. I'm sorry, I'm going to go a little fast, but I hope that if there is a recording of this, that you have some more time to look at it. The human-computer interaction model is, when it applies to games, is very simple. Imagine your player is here, and your player has an idea of what they have to do in the game. They press a button, which is input. The game processes that input, and the output is the feedback returned to the player. At each of these steps is an abstraction or a loss of information. So the player has an idea, but they don't just have an idea based on your game. When you're playing a first-person shooter on computer, you know what the jump button is. You know the jump button, it's spacebar. When you're playing a racing game, you know what the accelerate button is on a controller. It's right trigger, right? People bring expectations and ideas to your game. We call that the mental model. And from the mental model comes an intent. The player looks at the situation and they decide they want to do something. The game only offers them certain ways of input. So the player chooses the method of input that they think will achieve the goals they want. That input is processed by the computer, by the game, which changes a ton of variables, right? It might change a cooldown. It might change your rate of fire. It might fire a bullet. It might make a jump. It might realize that you are already jumping, so you can't jump again. Or it might realize that you're already jumping, but you still have a double jump. And then the game communicates back in the form of art, in the form of visuals, audio, haptic feedback, rumble, anything. Those steps don't have to be honest. When the player rolls the die or dice in a game, we don't have to be fair. We can make the dice roll in such a way that it's better for them. We might cheat for them. We might work for them. We might work against them. The trick of game development is to know that where the game is taking place is not here in the game. It's taking place here in the player. And as long as the player believes something, it's fair game. And we know this. Because when you make a 3D game, nobody actually programs the lands all the way to the horizon. We fake that. And the horizon isn't real either. The sky isn't real either. It's a skybox or a dome or a sphere, whatever you use. We know somewhere that we are tricking our players. I need you to not just know that. I need you to be 100% aware of that this is our job. Our job is to lie to our players for their entertainment. Because the characters we make, they're just polygons. And the high scores we give them, they're just numbers. The only value everything we do has is because the player believes it. And if you make games that way, instead of trying to be fair to a player, instead of trying to be honest with a player, you'll make better games. Because people don't want fair games. People don't want honest games. They say they want fair games, but what they say is they want games that feel fair. The easiest example of this is in a first-person shooter. It would be so much more fair if the AI was better at shooting. But in reality, in most first-person shooters, we intentionally make the first bullet miss. When you get shot at, the first few bullets will miss you so that you can see the bullets and go, oh, I know where they come from, turn around and fire back. In a platformer, we don't actually check whether people are still on the ground. We check whether they were on the ground in the last few milliseconds, so that even if they jump a little too late, they still jump. Coyote time is what we call that. This one is simple. It is a line. It is a split in two. There is now, when we've drawn this line, there is an above and a below. And it is so simple. It is such a simple idea. Every choice you make about your game does this. There are things that are now within your choices and outside your choices. The smaller you can make the space you have, the more constraints you put on yourself, the easier it'll be to make your game. A lot of people think of constraints as bad, of freedom as good. As creatives, the opposite is true. We need the freedom away from every possible choice. We need to make our brains focus on something. And as long as everything is possible, figuring out which of everything we do is impossible. So our first step should be to split the possibility space. There's now an above, there's a below. And then split that space. There's now a left, there's a right. And then split that space. There's now an above, there's now a below. And as you keep doing that, your game will become clearer. Whew. This is a model that I came up with myself. It's very simple. The circle in the middle is your core. The circle outside of that is your mechanics. The circle outside of that is your feedback. And the circle outside of that is your meta. Your core is the heart of your game. The absolute heart, the unique selling point, the thing that your game does in a way that no other game does, or the reason that your game deserves to exist. And it can be many things. It is not your marketing materials. Your marketing materials are to sell your game. This is your justification for spending time on this game. Why do you think this game is special? What do you think makes this game unique? And all this model is that in this circle around it, you can write down any mechanic that you have, any mechanic at all. And you should be able to draw an arrow from that mechanic to your core. And it has to make sense. Some mechanics will point at each other. So you might have a mechanic here and a mechanic there, and they point at each other, and that's fine. But what you don't want is a mechanic that points at 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 the core, or a mechanic that doesn't point at the core at all. If you ever get lost, draw this. Draw a circle, write down what is truly special about your game. Then write down your mechanics and figure out whether they point back at the core. Then figure out your feedback, your declaration, your art style, your music. Does that point back at the core or at the mechanics, or both? All is good. Or does it point away from it? Does it not support what you're doing? If you're making a realistic soccer game, your character should look realistic. The ball should look realistic. The stadium should look realistic. If you're making an anime soccer game, none of those things are true anymore. You should make sure that everything always supports the core. What is your game? This one is simple. You might have heard of it. Flow Theory by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And it's very simple. If you have the player's skill and you have the challenge that you give the player, the perfect place for your game to be is near this line, where the challenge develops as the player's skill does. And it doesn't mean the line has to be perfect. It's in fact even better if it sometimes goes over and sometimes goes under. That is perfect. What you don't want is a skill curve that looks like that, or a skill curve that looks like this. If you stay too low, people get bored. If you stay too high, people get frustrated. A flow between these states is probably the healthiest place you can be. That doesn't mean you can't make hard games. You can make hard games. Please make hard games. I love hard games. But even in hard games, you have to realize that there have to be points of tension and points of relief. This is the MDA framework. I could talk to you about the MDA framework. I don't think I have time to talk about the MDA framework. So I'm not going to talk about the MDA framework. If you want to know more about the MDA framework, you can look it up. I don't fully agree with this framework or what it says, but I do think for many people, it can be a helpful tool in figuring out how they look at their game as developers versus how players look at their game as audience. And finally, this shape is a bit of a cheat. I want to talk about one thing, which is that possibility space, that thing that we talked about with the line here, with dividing. The goal should always be this, to take everything and turn it into something. This one I want to talk about is everything, because it's easier to go to something when you have more everything. So when people ask me, how do I become a better game developer? I say, go skydiving, right? Go skydiving, do something weird. Learn to cook or to knit. Read a book or write one. Go read stories. Go think about stories that you've heard when you were a child. Look at how the world works or how it doesn't. What is fair? What is unfair? Think about everything. Learn about everything. Be curious about everything. Because in the end, the more everything is in your brain, the better you can remix it into something new. You might have heard the phrase everything is a remix. And they don't mean everything is A plus B. They mean that in our brains, sort of magic happens, where our brains, more than we ourselves, can connect pieces of information in sometimes absurd and unpredictable ways. You will definitely have woken up from a dream once, where you just woke up and you went like, what the, you know? Our brains do that, and they do that all the time. And the more we know, the more interesting those mixes become. From there on, obviously, the challenge is to take all that everything and point it into a focus point of creativity. But the more everything we have, the more chances we have to make something interesting. Summarized, these 6 shapes will help you make and help you understand better your game development, your game design. And your game design has to go through a process, just like your business case, just like your pitching, of ideation, prototyping, brainstorming, creating supporting materials, iteration, and feedback. This is a loop that will continue from the first day of your project until you stop working on it. It will never stop. As a macro level, you will go through these steps: ideation, prototype, brainstorm, supporting materials, iteration, feedback. On a micro level, per design, per piece of art, per visual style, per area, per song, per sound effect, you will go through this exact cycle, but on a smaller scale. Make this cycle second nature for your pitch, for your game design, for your store page, for your marketing. No matter what it is you're doing, if you follow these steps, if you keep to the ideas of iteration, you will have a good chance of doing things right. And with that comes no promise that it'll work out, because our industry is hard and it is difficult. And at times it is unfair. But this is your best bet. This is your best bet towards success in our industry. And if you are ever stuck, if you ever don't know what to do, ask somebody. It's okay. Ask me. You can at any time find me on calendly.com/tha_Rami and book a meeting with me. Just talk with me for 20 minutes about your game for free. I won't charge a single dollar. You will get 20 minutes to talk about whatever you're stuck with. There are many like me in the industry. I'm not the only one. If you are stuck, find people that are knowledgeable. Find people that you look up to. Send them a message, a DM, an email, reach out. And not everybody might have time, but they will try. I can promise you they will try. So keep to this process. Keep going. Keep making things. Keep making games. And then one day, hopefully, things work out. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rami. This was very inspiring and informative talk.
Thank you.
And now we will transition to a Q&A session. And I will just give everybody in this call permission to unmute and to start the video. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask question in person. And in between, I will also read the YouTube chat for any other questions.
Hey.
Hey.
If I can just go first, if that's fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. I wanted to ask about generally in publishers and what you think, do you think independent developers should even try to pitch a game to a publisher? Because I've been doing a bit of research on that, and I feel like, well, most of the sales that you get are gonna come from Steam anyway, where it's very dependent on the algorithm. However, I feel like that a publisher's experience and the fact that they know the game industry
Yeah.
might be the thing that's helpful. And especially like you mentioned before, just like getting feedback from even being rejected by unpublished
Exactly.
would be helpful.
Even if you don't intend your game to be published, it is a good idea to pitch to publishers. Just for the practice of communication, just for the practice of the business case, just for checking how much your numbers make sense. The advantage that publishers have is not per se that they're good at anything, right? What they're good at is that they have money and they have connections. And those connections are very useful in the industry. If you could get the money from somebody else than a publisher, most publishers work with marketing agencies. They have external QA, they have external localization, they have external porting houses. They hire those people to do that work for them. So if you can find the money to pay for all of that yourself, you're just as well off not using a publisher. The question then becomes, how do you get that money, right? The reason publishers exist is because they're kind of a one-stop solution to a lot of problems in the industry. As developers, we frequently don't have time to do our marketing properly. We don't have time to get to know how the algorithm works, and we don't have the output to get priority. When you look at something like Devolver Digital or Raw Fury, they're releasing games every month, right? And every month, that means that for Steam or Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo, it is a good idea to keep a good relationship with them, because they will bring content and an audience to their platforms every month. As an independent developer, we release a game maybe once every 2 years, right? If you're fast, 6 months. If you're slow, 5 to 6 years. Neither is better, don't get me wrong. Fast isn't better, slow isn't worse. Slow isn't better, fast isn't worse. But our relationship with these platforms will always be more momentarily than it is for the publisher. So they have this massive advantage in how they communicate and how they negotiate, because they are not just negotiating with your work, they're negotiating with the overarching work of all the other products they're working on. So do you need a publisher? No, of course not. We've had independent developers without publishers for decades, right? Is it helpful as the industry is right now? Of course it is. In the end, it's a business consideration. Is the value you will get from a publisher worth more than the money they ask, right? Is the work from a publisher worth the 30% that they will take from you, or the 50% that they will take from you? Is the money they will give you worth the money they will take at the end, right? And you can't know the answer for these. This is risky. If they put $50,000 into your game and your game makes $100 million, if you're the next Among Us, then of course they've made a ton of money just by giving you a tiny bag of $50,000. But if they put $50,000 in and your game sells 0 units, they've lost $50,000, right? Entrepreneurship is risk. It's risk-taking. You never know the answers. You have to be comfortable with never knowing the answers. But what you can do is prepare, read up, calculate, be honest, budget, figure out what value you're getting from somebody, figure out whether they're trustworthy, talk to people they've worked with, get an idea for whether they're dependable, and if it is a good fit, to work with them. And in the meanwhile, just go pitch your game anyway. Like, even if you don't want to sell it to them, like, good practice. They make enough money off of developers, don't worry. We can waste some of their time.
Okay, thanks. I mean, like, makes sense. And the whole, like, just pitch it regardless is, yeah.
Cheers.
We have a few questions also from Zoom chat. So Goran asked, like, when you were explaining the heads method, can you use this as a solo or a duo dev, like to wear multiple hats?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just not wear multiple hats at the same time. Switch through individual hats. So put the red hat on, and then have the other person switch through 2 other hats, and then switch the red hat. I do it as a solo dev frequently for all sorts of things, not just for game development itself. Like, it is really an interesting way of exploring an idea and forcing your brain to learn different ways of looking at things, right? The yellow hat, for example, has been great for me in figuring out opportunities, right? Sometimes I would see something on the internet I go like, that's not relevant to me. And I would put on the yellow hat and be, wait, but maybe there is opportunity for me, right? If you have to be positive about something for a moment, they might go like, wait a minute. What if, right? What if I reach out? Take Ouya, for example. Remember Ouya? Ouya was funny. When Ouya was being announced, they came to a lot of indie devs and they said like, hey, do you want to bring your game out on our platform? It's going to be great. And all of us went like, it's going to be a disaster. But they came to us and I was going to say no, but I put on the yellow hat and I said, well, you know what? It's a new platform. If it works, we're on their platform. And we will make lots of money by being one of the first games on there. If it doesn't work, but they pay us a little bit of money to port the game over, right? Then we still earned a little bit of money and we got some porting practice. Why would I not do that? Even though I don't think the platform is going to work, why not take their money? And the same thing is true recently for something like Stadia, where a lot of people don't believe in Stadia. And I understand why they don't believe in Stadia, especially after recent news. I understand why they don't believe in Stadia. That said, if you're an indie developer and you saw Stadia a year and a half ago asking for games and you didn't pitch your game, you need to wear that yellow hat more. Because that's literally Google giving away money. They have infinite money. You could go to them and be like, here, I have Pac-Man at $70,000. And they'll go like, oh, that's cheap. Like, put on that yellow hat more often. Put on the red hat more often. Put on the white hat more often. Just don't put on some of these hats in public. Keep it for yourself or your team. Not everybody needs to know everything that gets discussed or everything that you think or everything that you go through, especially with audiences that are what's the right word? Uninformed, but think they are informed as the gaming audience, where if you say we're exploring multiplayer, it means that definitely confirmed for the next update, 8-person multiplayer online. You have to be careful with what you say in public. But for a solo dev, for a duo dev internally, use these hats. As an individual, use these hats. Just as a human, use these hats.
Thank you for the answer. From same person, from Goran, one more question. Does vertical slice need to be interactive, or it can be a pre-rendered video?
The best version of a vertical slice is interactive. However, if your team cannot deliver an interactive version, then the interactive prototypes combined with a video of vertical slice will also work. The problem with just a video is that it's really easy to fake things, right? It's really easy to make combat look super cool on a video. And then you go, okay, so what buttons is the player pressing? And you just go like, left trigger, I guess, and then X a lot, and then it looks like this. And it's like, so when you press X 500 times, your character teleports around the screen to random places and throws swords at your enemy's head and then catches them on the other hand. And that's how fighting works. And it's like, it sounds better on paper, right? It's really easy to make that mistake. It's really easy to use a video editing to cover up things that don't work in your game, right? An example I get very frequently when I'm listening to young developers brainstorm is they go like, okay, so then you walk at the castle, and the castle is in the distance. And as you get closer, it gets bigger and bigger. And, the weather turns bad. And it's just this really spooky thing. So that when you get to the castle, it's like really imposing. It's go like, and how long does this take? They're like, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. It has to be a long walk. I'm like, you could do this in 20 seconds and people would already be bored of walking. Right. Like literally 20 seconds, people will be like, oh, fuck, I have to walk to the castle again. I don't want to walk to the castle again. Especially if they have to walk to the castle multiple times. And it's really easy in video to just cut that. Just be like, okay, you start walking to the castle and then you cut and now you're at the castle. It's a little harder in the game. I mean, you could do it, but then you have to actually do it. So my recommendation is always make your vertical slice interactive so that you truly know the workload of making something work, the workload of making something fun. You can use this in your time budgeting, in your money budgeting. If there is no other way but to do video, that's supported with prototypes. But if you can do it as an interactive vertical slice, I would recommend, for your own sake and for the sake of communication, that you do it interactively.
Thank you. I think this answers the questions. And I think I want to go to the next question, but I see that Omar is also joined the chat, so I guess you can just ask him.
Yeah, hi. I have a question, yeah.
Go for it.
Hi, Rami. I'm from Egypt also, by the way.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. Right. So my question is, what you advise for those who are being dropped from university and they cannot catch up? I'm not saying they cannot catch up with the industry, but the industry treating them kind of being underestimated.
Right. I mean, this is a hard problem, and it's a problem that a lot of us in the industry face as uneducated, right? Like I managed to get a diploma in the end by fighting with my university for 2 years, right? Like and I managed to graduate in the end, but I still don't use my paper. I don't feel I deserve it. So I don't use the degree because I want to know what it is like to not have that advantage, right? Because it is important to me that I stay true to that idea. And it sounds silly, but the honest reality of the games industry is that while diplomas and degrees are getting more and more important, right? Ultimately, your skill, and more than your skill, your humanity, decide more. And people ask me, Rami, what do you mean with humanity? And I mean that when I meet people and I say, I'm the best programmer you will ever meet, right? I'm the best artist you will ever meet. I don't care. I don't care. And you know why I don't care? Because I meet that person 100 times a day. I go to GDC, I meet 100 good programmers. I meet 100 good artists. I meet 100 good sound designers and musicians. I meet 500 game designers and musicians. They email me all the time. Very good, but wow, they email a lot. What I care about is that when I talk with somebody, I get a feeling that they are curious, they are constructive, that they will help my team be better than my team is right now, right? That they will support people in my team, even if they disagree with people in my team. When I look for people, I'm not just looking for the best at their field. I'm looking for good in their field, because I can hire 1 million good people, good in any field, right? In your case, your lack of education or your lack of being allowed education, from what it sounds like, comes down to you have to fight harder to prove the other things, right? You have to fight harder to prove your skill and your ability to work in a team. And you have to grow your network, because your network is ultimately how you get opportunities. If you want to, and I offered this before, and I offer it to everybody is here, if you go to calendly.com/Rami, right, th_Rami, I will put that in the chat. I think.
Please, because I couldn't.
Right. You know what? Let me just. Can we put that? Wait, I can put it on the screen. Can I put it on the screen?
Go.
I will put it. I'm an XSplit. I can do whatever I want with this. I can do some weird stuff. Let's see. It is calendly.com. Why is this so terrible? Okay. This is awful. I wish I was good at this program. How do I make it smaller? Smaller? No. Outline, opacity. Everything's here besides size. Here we go. This is the page. You go to that website and book a phone call with me. 20 minutes, emergent territory call, right? We will talk about your portfolio. We will talk about your skills. We will talk about where you could find opportunity to improve, where you could find opportunity to improve your portfolio, your cover letter, and hopefully find you a place to fit in the games industry. I can't promise that I can find you something, but I can promise that talking to people in the industry will improve your chances. And if I can be the first with that, it will be my honor.
Thank you.
of course.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Like, just feel free to unmute and ask away.
Yeah, Rami, hi.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm great, thanks. I missed the first half, so sorry if you already answered this, but I wanted to talk about, just ask, because you're such a big event person, you know, you're everywhere. How's this pandemic affecting you? And also, do you think we're coming back to conferences, or is it going to be a hybrid forever?
I think my hope. So for those of you who don't know, for the past 10 years, I think I went to every event I could possibly go to. I would have my Monday in Seattle in the United States, my Wednesday in Johannesburg in South Africa, and my Friday in Helsinki in Finland. And this was normal for me. For years, I went to every event that I could go to, small country, big country, everybody that would invite me that I could figure out how to pay for it right? Whether I pay for it myself or they pay for it. I would go to everything. Because I wanted to know as many people as I could. I wanted to learn from as many people as I could. And a lot of people wanted to learn from me what I knew. So for 10, 12 years, I have not been in any country for longer than 3 weeks. I was always traveling. So when you ask, how has this pandemic been for me? It has literally changed my life. I have learned that downstairs in this building, I have a garage. I did not know that my home has a garage because I was never here. I would be here for a few weeks a year, and that was it. And then recently I saw somebody walk into the building through another door that I had never seen. I was like, where's this person going? And I followed them, and I found their garage. And in the garage was a cabinet from the previous person who lived here 8 years ago. I still don't know what's in the cabinet. I don't have the key for it, but I will break it open someday. It'll be an exciting adventure, or terrifying. I don't know what I will find there. I'm a little worried. Either way, the industry had to adjust, right? And I think a lot of the adjustments that we're seeing are to move things to digital, which I'm a huge proponent of, right? I think it is fairer for a lot of the world to be allowed access to these events, no matter where they are, no matter where they're from, no matter whether they need a visa or not, and no matter whether they can afford it. And events, including this one, being available is critical to our industry growing and reaching the people that deserve it. That said, there is obviously a benefit to meeting in person. There's a benefit to the conversations that happen as you walk by each other and you walk into each other. And the same for how we met. That was not an intentional meeting, right? Mm. You meet because you share a space, or you share an environment. With that, it is important to recognize that real life events will always have some benefits, the same way the new digital events have benefits. Mm. And I think for our industry to truly grow from this, we have to find that hybrid. We have to make a way in which people can be part of the industry no matter where they are, but they can also get access to opportunities simply by being in a place. My biggest worry, bigger than anything else, is that when this is over, when this pandemic is over, we just go back to only in real life events. And I love those events. But I've now seen what can happen when all these events are digital, right? When all this information is available to everyone. And I see it around the world. I see it in South America. I see it in Egypt. I see it in Russia. I see it in Pakistan. I see it everywhere around the world. That people are joining these events that they would normally never be able to go to because they can't get the visa, they can't get cleared, they aren't allowed into these countries, they can't afford going there. So for me, the biggest worry is that we go back. If we want to go forward, we have to have both. We have to make sure that it will be both for everybody. And in the meanwhile, if any of you are looking for a place to meet and talk, the best thing I found is the games industry gathering. It's called The Gig. If you haven't heard of it, Google Gig Games Industry, GIG Games Industry. It's an event. It happens once a week, usually on Friday. And it's a little bit like this Zoom. But instead of me talking to everybody, every 20 minutes, the host splits the Zoom into groups of 5 randomly. And you just get to talk. You get to meet each other, get to talk a bit about your game, get to talk a bit about your situation, get some advice from each other, give some advice to other people. And it's the most, I felt like being in an industry event where you're walking through and you see some people, and you're like, hey, how are you doing? And you catch up and you talk about your life and you go, oh, wait, I need to talk to them. Like, give me 5 minutes, I'll be right back. And then you never come back because that conversation, like you say like, oh, we'll talk, we totally have to have dinner at some point. And then dinner never happens because you're invited to like 15 dinners or like organizing a dinner, It feels like that. Things keep moving, you keep meeting people. So if you're looking for that, which I can imagine because, you travel to, I can really recommend the gig. It's probably the closest we have at the moment.
Awesome. Thanks. Didn't know about that.
It's good stuff. I think I have time for one more. If there is one more. It's going to be really awkward if there's not one more.
I'm here.
Okay.
I muted myself. You know how that goes.
It will be so awkward if I go like, there's time for one more question. And then it's just like silence for 3 minutes.
No,
like...
I got you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, and it's a follow-up from this last pandemic stuff you were talking about, because the pandemic forced everyone to experience like a lot of new things, right? And you said this is good for game design. And so my question would be, how do you think this will affect like the industry as a whole and the games that will be released from now on? You think there will be a change?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's a very good observation. The games we make are absolutely affected by the context we make them in. And I think the easiest ways to look at that is you just look at the history of indie games, right? You start. And most of the developers that are going independent, right, are X-AAA developers. So you get games like Braid, like Fez, like Super Meat Boy, people that have experience, or at least the team has experience in bigger games, right? And then we get to the students, the people inspired by those games, but they don't know shit. Sorry, can I swear? Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
okay.
You can.
Okay, a little too late. But they don't know what they're doing. And they learn as they go. But the games you see them make are strange and weird and impolite, are experimental. And they start making money, right? Some of them start making money. And this aesthetic develops. This aesthetic of indie games, arcade, pixel, gameplay first. That's the time I grew up in, right? My career in the industry started in that era. And then mobile comes. And you see indie games get smaller. They get smarter. Games like Cannibalt happen. And then we continue. And you know what happens? Twitch happens. And what does Twitch teach us? Twitch teaches us that if a game can be replayed over and over, or if a game is multiplayer, that streamers will keep playing it. And that if streamers keep playing it, that we have free marketing for as long as they play it. So suddenly we get games like PUBG, right? We get games where people can play online against each other. You get roguelikes. Nuclear Throne was built on the idea that Twitch people would play it and keep playing it for a long time if they loved it, right? And at the same time, you're starting to see this creativity. People want to express themselves through building things. Minecraft happens, Roblox happens, right? Fortnite eventually mixes both of them into one thing and becomes probably the biggest game in the history of all times. Everything that happens in our industry is always a response to something. And the two things that our industry will be responding to in the next few years are very simple. The first one is the pandemic, the sense of wanting to be together even when we are apart. The same thing that led to the success, even though not the original success, of a game like Among Us, of a game like Fall Guys. The second response that we're going to see is the response to the subscription model. The idea that a company will pay you money for exclusive access to your game or an exclusive release of your game or permanent access to your game through a monthly subscription. Things like Game Pass and Apple Arcade. And why we will see an adjustment for that is because most indies that exist now cannot compete anymore with the publishers, cannot compete anymore with the reality of game development. The bar has gone so high for big independent development that a lot of us have to take deals with these platforms, right? With Xbox, with PlayStation, with Apple, with Stadia. But the model of making a game for subscription has to be completely different than Twitch, right? Because if people are paying $9.95 anyway, making a 2-hour narrative games is suddenly a possibility again. It wasn't on Steam because people can refund your game if they complete it within 2 hours, right? Suddenly, it is a bad idea to make a game that expands every month, games as a service, because that just takes money out of you every month in terms of development, in terms of service, that you're not earning anymore. You're not getting paid for anymore because people are accessing it through these subscriptions. So the industry changes. And the next thing that will happen after this is that there will be a counterforce. People will start making games and say, well, you know what? You pay money for this game outside of your monthly subscription, but this game is worth it, right? When that happens, no idea, right? I don't know. How streaming will affect our industry, we thought we would find out a bit sooner, but with Stadia, kind of like, what is the polite way? There is no polite way of saying that. With Stadia doing what it did, it seems like we will have to wait a bit longer before we figure out how that will affect our industry. But I think in terms of pandemic, yes, we will see a huge effect on the games that get made. My favorite one, honestly, and the strangest one, is that the idea of post-apocalypse has changed forever. Where we used to think of like, you know, the virus scenario in The Last of Us. You would see houses full of blood and screams and death. I think if we want to portray a virus apocalypse in the future, we'll have to put toilet paper in those houses. There's no way around it. Like, you cannot meaningfully tell me that there was a quarantine and houses are not full of toilet paper, right? Even in those small ways, the world has changed. So yeah, of course, what we make will be adjusted by this. Nothing gets to affect the entire planet the way this did, and not change how we think of entertainment and culture. So whether it is seeking togetherness, or thinking about multiplayer, or thinking about talking to each other about our games, yeah, the world has changed forever, and I think games will be better for it, even though the situation is shit. Sorry, I cursed again.
All right, thanks. That was a great answer. It's actually really true and interesting that the pandemic caused the whole genre, like the pandemic, to go from like fantasy to realism.
It's spooky. It's really spooky. I mean, I don't know if you played The Last of Us 2, but the first thing I did was walk through those houses and be like, where's the toilet paper? Like, I don't know what, like, I don't believe this world anymore. It was really strange.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cheers.
I think that's it.
It is for me. I have to head out.
Okay, then thank you again, Rami, for your time and for this awesome talk and for all of the answers. And yeah, and now we will jump onto Discord and start the unofficial mingling part. And I will just post the link on YouTube and also here. And yeah, thanks guys for coming. It was amazing having you, Rami.